Renee knows this. Like, I cut my teeth in the early years of solar, putting solar on homes in Australia. I remember my mum telling me, "You're crazy. This is too expensive. Like, that solar, it just doesn't make sense." Like, people who were putting early solar panels on rooftops were paying more for the kilowatt than what they were getting from the grid. That you're paying for it. It's now levelized cost of energy. It's more than cost competitive. It doesn't make sense not to put it on, if you can afford it, to not put it on your house on those early companies that did that R&D, did that commercialization, are the companies worth billions of dollars today. And that's what Climeworks will be when it comes to DAC. I don't think anyone's got any doubt about it.
So welcome back to This Week in Carbon. I'm your host, Eddie Smith, alongside weekly bestie, Renee Velasquez. And today we have two amazing guests, Abe Robertson from BioCare and Olivier Lejeune from Quantum Commodity Intelligence. Thank you guys for
2 out of 3
joining
weeks with French guests and you butchering their names, but I love it.
Is it a butcher? I don't think so.
It was close.
Yeah. Well, look, thank you guys for being here. Yeah. Sorry, Renee, don't try not to judge my pronunciations too hard. But yeah, thank you guys for being here. Really appreciate your time. We've got some good stories to dive into this week. So without further ado, let's dive into it. Right. And, one of the biggest stories was a significant durable carbon removal deal, which was Microsoft signing a 10-year offtake agreement with Bolivia-based Exomad Green for 1.2 million tons of biochar-based carbon removals. All right, the deal builds on a smaller 2023 agreement and is now the largest volume biochar CDR purchase ever, and showcases Microsoft's aggressive CDR procurement strategy, which we've seen consistently over the past few months. And per Quantum, Exomad is scaling rapidly with plants in operation and more under construction, aiming for 1 million tons of CO2 per year in capacity by 2027. The contract also embeds Carbon Future's digital MRV system, providing end-to-end traceability and third-party verifiability under the Pure Earth standard. And, with that, it leads into Microsoft and other corporates. We can see that they're leaning heavily into biochar carbon removals, right? And the question is this just about scale, or is biochar becoming the most bankable CDR pathway right now? I mean, I would love to get your guys' take on this. And, we've got a biochar expert in the house out of Abe, and would love to hear, your thoughts. And yeah, whoever wants to jump in first here.
Olivier, do you want to give us a little bit more context? Because obviously we're referencing the Quantum Commodity Intelligence story. Do you want to cue it up for us with a little bit more kind of detail from the reporting angle? And
I mean,
I think Abe and I can
said,
yeah.
As Ed said, it's Microsoft's second deal with Exomad. The first deal was much smaller. I think it was about 30,000 tons. So it's a completely different scale. Mm-hmm. And I think Exomad also announced an offtake with NextGen at the end of 2024. So it's effectively their third offtake agreement. And yeah, it's the biggest deal in the biochar market to date. It's interesting because Microsoft hasn't always been super hot on biochar. I think they define it as a medium-term permanence technology, and there was a lot of speculation that essentially they didn't really want to buy biochar, but they have done quite a few biochar transactions now, and it's super interesting from that angle. I think for me the key missing information is the price. We're a price reporting agency, and we're always interested in hearing the actual price of the deal. And I would speculate that this is close to $100 a ton. Maybe Abe has a different opinion on this. I think Microsoft is known to be looking for $100 deals in the biochar market, but yeah, like it's unknown officially what they paid for. Yeah,
Great. No, that's good. Abe, do you want to jump in on this one first? Given that you are our biochar expert, and also maybe give the audience a little bit of context about your storied background and how you've arrived at this position now as CEO of BioCare. And for context, Abe and I have known each other for a very long time. I've had the privilege of working with him on multiple occasions. We're really close friends.
We have indeed. Yeah, look, we've been working in biochar for some time and been keeping our heads down and sort of focused on welding, fabricating, and engineering. So we've installed one of the larger pyrolysis facilities on Kangaroo Island, and we're in the process of waiting for commissioning and approval. Hoping by the end of the year we'll be up and running. And I know Marcelo and the team at ExoMad. We'd consider them friends. We love what they're doing. Amazing project. Like, it's really one of the best projects out there. They've been pioneers in the space. I think everyone in the biochar community is really excited for them and championing them on. And like, we know a bit of Microsoft, a bit of their due diligence process. It's hard. Like, they do their homework. So to be able to secure this size deal, I think is just a credit to that team and what they're doing over in Bolivia. And incredible benefits. Like, they've really been advocating for not just the carbon removal, but the role of biochar in Bolivia and in the agriculture and how they apply it. And they're doing their research and testing and looking at the soils and looking at the improvements in the crop yield. So it's not just a pioneering offtake for biochar as a carbon removal, but biochar as a commodity in the agricultural space. So super, super excited for them. Also, they've sucked up 1.24 million tons out of the market. So as someone who's got a lot of supply coming, I'm not unhappy about that.
That's the old trader hat coming out.
You can't not be happy about that. And in terms of, like, Ed, your comment about biochar becoming, I'll just say biochar has and always will be, and I think will remain the leading CDR removal. I'm saying that as a biochar advocate, but we need all pathways, we need everything, and we can talk to that, I'm sure. But biochar is just an amazing pathway. Olivier, to your comment about medium durability, I think that's right. Like, Microsoft look at high, medium, and sort of lower durability in terms of, like, maybe nature, biochar being that middle, and then DAC and some of the other more geological type storages. But I think what is happening, and internationally there's an ongoing debate about, like, what is this biochar? What is the degree of aromatic carbon that is in there, and, like, is it inertinite, and how is that being measured, and what is the durability of that in soils? Like, we would advocate and say, like, there is terra preta, which has been quantified at 2,000 to 4,000 years old. Like, this is potentially man-made and not in the controlled environments that the likes of ExoMad and BioCare are doing within our pyrolysis. Like, we control the heating rate, the temperature, the residence time, to agree that we can custom engineer the biochar and really, really prioritize those highly aromatic carbon formations. So we are trying to design biochars that have that really high, long sort of durability that those buyers are looking for. So I think you're going to find biochar forming or forming a larger part of portfolios of many of these net zero companies as they move forward.
Yeah, no, thanks, Abe, and for that context. Can you go a little bit deeper, if you can, just a little bit on ExoMad Green's sort of feedstock? And I guess the limitation, and the reason why I asked about feedstock is it's the rate limiting step in generating the biochar that then can go into the soils. And essentially, there's a lot of waste biomass in the world that can then be obviously pyrolyzed, or there's other methods as well, but can then be effectively pyrolyzed to create the biochar. In the case of ExoMad, can you give us a little bit of context in terms of how they're approaching this problem, and certainly how they've achieved such scale? Because that's the interesting bit, really, from a market's perspective.
Yeah, so just to begin with, like like more and more, we're not talking about it as waste. This is a high value biomass. This is whether it's agricultural residues from everything from corn to coconut to rice husk. We're operating in Vietnam, in Sri Lanka. We're looking at projects in Argentina. There's Brazil with coffee husks. This is a high value product from our agricultural, side of the economy that can be converted into biochar, into carbon removal, potentially into energy as well. And I think that's one of the great benefits of the biochar as a pathway is you've got so many different revenue streams, and that keeps that marginal cost of removal down for buyers because there's other revenue streams that are sort of subsidizing the carbon removal, or you could argue the carbon removal is subsidizing these other commodities, energy, and then biochar going back into agriculture. So there's a lot of opportunity out there, and it is decentralized though. So you're going to see more smaller scale plants. It's not the same sort of huge impact you can have with DAC, for example, where you can really scale up, or BECCS really scale up and have these huge projects. But absolutely, the sustainability of the sourcing of the biomass is critical to pathways with Puro or isometrics, and critical to buyers. It's one of the first things they look at. Exomad we're so jealous of them, they're so fortunate. Like Exomad is a family business that's been focusing on high quality wood products. Bolivia is an extraordinary example of sustainable forestry management, and they are very fortunate to be there. So I don't think they have to go far to find high quality biomass. There's a whole history to that, why it was set up in a way. It's been the satellite imagery, the way they do sustainable harvesting. A lot of that, I think, originally was American foreign aid supporting the setup of the Bolivian forestry in sort of sector, and that's been carried forward. So it's a really, really high quality, sustainable source that they're using and they can scale up because it's a big forestry industry. So they're very fortunate over there. We're jealous of that feedstock, but there's lots of others like that. Like you look at Argentina, you look at Brazil. Brazil's complex because you've got a lot of potential deforestation, and so you've got to navigate that well. But there's forestry plantations all over the world where it's the waste from the forestry. So if you take a tree and you think about you trying to get a log out of it, there's a lot of byproduct. That. And so that byproduct is, what do you do with it? In a lot of places, it's a hazard. It's a fire hazard, or it's an environmental hazard, and they're looking for ways to dispose it. It's often burnt or incinerated or combusted in some way. Sometimes it's used for power and energy purposes, but often it is a true waste, but it's a byproduct that has value. Biochar potentially provides an opportunity to convert that into something value, and that's getting more value out of that photosynthesis, more value out of that biomass. So they're very lucky. Renee, Exomad are in a great position to scale up, and obviously Microsoft have seen that, and I think that signal to them is go, and that enables them, as I think Ed was saying, bankability. Hopefully that enables them to attract project finance because they'll need the capex to keep going. They've shown they can do that, so hopefully some big things coming from them, no doubt, in the next few years.
Yeah, fantastic. Thanks for that context, Ed. It is really great, and to your earlier point, right, around the imperative really around net zero by 2050 really is a defining goal of our century, essentially. And in order to get there, we really need this serious investment. You touched on it in your last comment. And that investment doesn't really come in, whether it's carbon removal or reductions, it doesn't come in until you have the offtake. So it's really great to again see a large corporate like Microsoft and continuously being Microsoft. Actually, I have to commend them specifically on stepping up to the plate and providing the underwriting from the offtake. The bit around that intrigues me, and I'm certainly not purporting to be a biochar expert, and that's what we've got Abe on. But the current carbon removal capacity, I think, is it's great to see that this is such a sector that's growing at such a rapid rate. But do you think it's fair to say, actually, I'll present this question, Abe. Do you think it's fair to say that carbon removal capacity is just nowhere near what we need to meet the global climate goals? But it's such an incredibly fertile, excuse the pun, ground for potential. You highlighted enhanced rock weathering, DAC, and obviously biochar. I think biochar out of those three is the one with the most potential for scale. Any kid comment?
Yeah, no, happy to. I'll quote one of your former guests, like Rich Gilmer. Like, we need everything everywhere all at once. Like, the way I see carbon removal is that's the last, like it's like the last refuge is like buy carbon removals, because it is expensive. But what it does is it sets a price. So if you're on a net zero pathway, you dust off your marginal abatement cost curve, you look, and what you do is you go tell your team to turn the lights off. Like it costs you nothing. You make money. Like you become more energy efficient. You look at ways that you can improve your processes. You look at boiler retrofits. You look, what can you do not to buy a removal credit? A little bit. And I mean that because I sell removal credits. But the first thing is decarbonize. Then you've got to look at what are your residual emissions, like what's left over, and you've got to then think about how you're going to deal with that. I think biochar is the lowest marginal cost with incredible potential to scale at a cost-effective price. Now, we can argue about what is cost-effective and what that price should be, and people have thrown out $100. I think that's a bit ambitious. I think we're looking at 150 to 200. I think that's what's that'll cement over time. You'll get a lot of early stage project developers in biochar saying they can bring the cost down to $100, like before they've done any front end design or engineering, before they've done any
and
operational.
they find out the hard way that they
before
undersold.
Yeah, and then this is what happens in for developers out there. Like think about this. Think about the maintenance and uptime. Like if you're not managing your syngas and you have to deal with your tarring and you lose 5%. 10% of the year, and you didn't factor that into that financial model, how does that impact your biochar price? How does that impact your CDR price? So I think we're seeing a lot of early stage financial models that get everyone excited about $100 US, and that's just not reality, especially not the scale that some of these are at. So I'd be very surprised, Olivier, if the price was that low. That said, if a buyer came along and said, I'm going to do a $150 million offtake and I've got a balance sheet like Microsoft, you can walk into many financiers and say, well, I've got a high CapEx upfront cost here. So that's a bankable offtake. They're likely to get a very good discount for that. And that's reasonable, I think. So that early commitment by Microsoft paves the way for them to get a very, very good price because they're enabling Exomad to go get proper finance now. And I think that's where I think that balancing act is that buyer working with that developer to come to a reasonable price that maybe if it was the spot, you're looking at $180, $200. But if you're buying forward, you might be at 120, 150, you might be lower. So I think that's reasonable.
But also the forward curve's not flat. Like it's not a spot deal. It's a forward deal, and it starts small and then it starts to ramp up. And over a 10-year period, the price is going to be higher and higher and higher. It's effectively a step up price, right? There's a lack of a benchmark today, so you can't float it in terms of pricing based on a futures contract. So it's all contractually negotiated bilaterally, and it's fair to assume that in 2035, right, when you start to get that final delivery, that price is a lot higher than where it is today. Would you think? I mean, obviously, we don't know the commercials, and we haven't talked to Marcelo. I've invited him to come and join the podcast, but
I'll nudge him to get on and have a chat with you. But like there's all sorts of structures too. Like what are they looking for? Like obviously, a buyer like Microsoft wants certainty of supply. They've got an obligation, and they've committed, and they're really going for it. Like I just have so much, hats off to them. They're setting the scene, right? But there might be a put call in there. There might be all sorts of structures in there. There might be defaults for this, and if you deliver early, that you might get a high price. Who knows? So I think people anchor on what did they pay. Yeah, the only thing that matters is that's a lot.
It is a lot. And also I like your point around what you said. Given Microsoft's balance sheet, and let's just do some back of the envelope calculations. You said $150 million to $200. Sorry, $150 to $200, and what's the deal size? 1.2. So let's just say it's 100. Let's say 100, almost $250 million potentially on the upside in terms of the size of the deal, which is a big deal in carbon markets. Obviously, that's huge. But Microsoft, I think, had a net income of like almost, I think, over $80 billion. So it's almost. I won't say a rounding error, but it's 0.2, 0.3%.
This is not
their
getting to
annual
the
income.
It's not going to the board. This is not huge.
I remember speaking to some folks at Microsoft, and then they said, "Yeah, look, I manage a business unit that's $1 billion in revenue, but it's really like infinitesimally small in the broad context." It's just like, oh, okay, cool.
I'm pretty sure.
Shout out to Exomad, basically. Good, really, really good to see. Hey, Abe. Oh, sorry, Eddie, you jump in. I did have a question about some technical stuff around pyrolysis for Abe, if you'll indulge me there.
Well, all right, before we get into the technical stuff, I thought it was interesting, seeing that Carbon Future's digital MRV system
Yeah.
was implemented into the offtake contract. Is this something, does embedding digital MRV into offtake contracts meaningfully reduce project risk for buyers and investors? I mean, that's like the question that pops up into my head from seeing that. I mean, is this something that we've seen before with other, offtake agreements in the CDR space, or is this something that is, a brand new development?
I could give you a high level. Like one, I think Carbon Future should be. It's not just their DMRV, but I think I imagine they arranged this deal, and so I think they've not only helped with the DMRV, but they've helped like navigate the stakeholder relations that brings about. That this is a big deal, and lots of people are involved in making that come about. Their DMRV, I think it's very much focused on the tracking of the buyer chart to the end use, and that's really important in a project, especially in a project like Exomad, because I don't think they have very large revenue streams from the buyer chart. Like they really do rely on the carbon removal. So this is a really important deal for them, I would imagine. I'm sure Marcelo and the others can talk about it to themselves. But tracking the end use of the buyer chart is fundamentally important, particularly where there's a risk that the buyer chart might be used in other combustion, either for energy or for power or elsewhere. And if there's no price attached to it, I think the MRV increases. I think if there's a price being paid and then where that end use is, it probably reduces a bit. So in America and Australia and other places where the biochar is going into agriculture and there's a pretty high price being paid for that, and then you can get pretty cheap coal, like you're not going to burn it, like it's a high value product. But I think in places where they are short energy, then I think tracking that biochar is really, really important. And so these MRV providers are providing a really critical role in building confidence for the end buyer that what they're buying is durable carbon removal, and they know it's gone back into the soil or back into the industrial process or whatever it is, to satisfy them that that durable removal is credible and there's a high integrity claim against it.
Yeah. Yeah, certainly. Well said. So, I think we should move on to the next story, which is, a big one facing Climeworks, right? And I think, Olivier, if you want to add any gaps I'm missing to this story, but this is the first time since its high-profile rise that Climeworks, which has been a poster child for direct air capture, DAC, has been facing real public and financial scrutiny, right? So the Swiss-based company has confirmed it's cutting 106 jobs globally, citing macroeconomic uncertainty and shifting policy priorities. And at the center of this crisis seems to be underperformance of its flagship DAC plants in Iceland, and claims to be removing up to 4,000 tons of carbon annually per site. But the actual figures show just over 2,400 tons total since operations began in 2021, which is less than the company's own operational emissions. And their Monmouth plant, which was launched in 2024 with big fanfare, has only removed 105 tons of carbon dioxide in 10 months. So, it's an interesting development that we're seeing here. I mean, the company's growth had been mainly focused on the U.S. with development partners in Louisiana for their DAC hub in Louisiana, and it got a $50 million funding from the Biden administration, the regional DAC hubs program. So under the new administration, fiscal incentives and funding for DAC, there's a lot of like they said, macroeconomic uncertainty for facing major cuts or with complete withdrawal. So, is there anything I'm missing from that story, Olivier?
Yeah. No, I think that's the real story. It's really the US,
Yeah.
the impact of Trump's election on the company like Climeworks.
Is it the impacts of Trump's election, or is it like the fact that it's only removed, like its own operational emissions have overtaken the amount of carbon it's sucked out of the air?
So the company themselves have acknowledged that they have been a bit slow to kind of build up the new DAC plant in Iceland. And they have faced issues definitely developing that technology. There may be things that we don't know that are, have
Certainly.
happened. It was actually revealed by an Icelandic newspaper about 2 weeks ago, and that's kind of triggered the whole
Yeah.
kind of scrutiny on Climeworks. But I personally think the real story is uncertainty around subsidies in the US, which the company is relying on in a big way to kind of develop its new facilities. We still don't know what the new administration intends to do with DAC. We do know that a lot of the people who were developing that policy have gone, and clearly the public statements are not supportive of carbon removals or anything climate change related. At the same time, DAC is a bit special because it's a technology that's been favored by a lot of the oil companies, of course, which are obviously in a good position right now in the US. So it's all a bit unclear, basically, what's going to happen to DAC in the US, but it makes me wonder whether Climeworks are aware of a policy change, or whether they're maybe even aware that they're going to lose funds in the US, and they're taking precautionary action by firing some staff. It's pure speculation, but we'll see, I guess.
Yeah, very well said. And I mean, given the nature of the technology, I think this might be a part of the growing pains of building out a revolutionary technology and startup. So it's not anything. I see these articles. It's like direct air capture scam, doesn't do, like, suck carbon out of the air. It's just ridiculous. Like, they've done a lot of great work, and props to the Climeworks team, but it's just a roller coaster ride for early stage technologies. Abe, did you want to jump in here?
Yeah, only like just to, I guess, reiterate what you're saying. It is like, ClimateWorks has been a pioneering advocate for climate removal, carbon removal, and in particular DAC. And we need direct air carbon capture. Like, I don't know anyone who thinks we don't need that. And I'm a biochar person. We need them, and I need them to set a high price so I can sell under it. That's one thing, if I can put it that way. But like, they have been instrumental. Their brand is important. The way they advocate is important. It's a storm in a teacup, in my opinion. It's just a company making a rational decision, facing the volatility and uncertainty of changing policies in the US. Like, that's it. And if like, you're talking about Climateworks, let's talk about every other business there is, because every business I know is changing what it does. Do we go to America? Do we not? Like, is there an opportunity there? How are tariffs going to impact us? Are they not? Like, I think it's just someone hunting for something to say. I think I'm pumped by what Mammoth can do and what they can do as a business. I think it's fundamental that we give them the time, the capital, and the resources to be able to flourish. I think it's critically important. Biochar will be a net beneficiary of them being slowed down. Like, the longer it takes to bring DAC, the more biochar you need to buy, and we can scale up pretty quickly in the background. But they will keep on going, right? They're going to keep on innovating, keep on researching, developing. And Renee knows this. Like, I cut my teeth in the early years of solar, putting solar on homes in Australia. I remember my mum telling me, "You're crazy. This is too expensive." Like, that's solar. It just doesn't make sense. Like, people who are putting early solar panels on rooftops were paying more for the kilowatt than what they were getting from the grid. You're paying for it. It's now levelized cost of energy. It's more than cost competitive. It doesn't make sense not to put it on, if you can afford it, to not put it on your house. Those early companies that did that R&D, did that commercialization, are the companies worth billions of dollars today, and that's what Climeworks will be when it comes to DAC. I don't think anyone's got any doubt about it.
Can I comment on that? I think I love this, right? Because it's a very rational view. So the first things first, like, management making a rational decision around reducing their burn rate. Applause. Like, that's their job. They have a fiduciary obligation to their shareholders. They have to do that, right? And so that's really what this is. And to your point, Abe, I think the last 2 points that you made really are resonant. That essentially there's a changing sort of situation and in terms of policy direction, right? So in the United States, and now you had tailwinds that have become headwinds, and they're adapting to that. Hence, they're making a decision around being more prudent around their fiscal management of their business. The but the other thing that we have to kind of support here is that those businesses, they're taking that leadership, like you said, right? Like they're early movers in this space. However, to your solar point, right? Those early movers in the PV game, they were supported through policy measures. That's the role of governments, to help to incubate and stimulate these developments of these really ambitious industries. And I think it's a perfect example. Like Swanson's law of photovoltaics shows that you effectively, like Moore's law, but in inverse, basically reduce the price as you achieve greater scale, right? But there's a hurdle rate at the beginning. You have to overcome that. And you had a lot of incentives, whether that was in the US and China and in Spain and in Germany at the early days of photovoltaics, to help those industries become sort of established. And then you had sort of manufacturing kind of expand in China and achieve those units of scale. I think DAC is really interesting, and there's a lot of parallels there. The only thing that I'd raise, and so two things: commend the ambition and I guess the willingness to embrace the really difficult, right? Like that is leadership and in its essence. So I really want to shout them out for that. Like you said, they're not only advocates for DAC, but they're advocates for CDR in general, and they've been amazing at it, and they've been really ringing that bell really, really hard, and they should be commended for that bravery. But I just want to kind of point out the difficulty of what they're trying to achieve. They're effectively trying to unscramble what is a key law in physics, right? The second law of thermodynamics, which states that essentially in any energy transfer, entropy tends to increase, meaning effectively that the systems naturally move from order to disorder. Think of it like if like ice is melting, right? Like you put ice outside and it starts to melt. In this case, they're trying to take CO2 that is diffused into the atmosphere, suck that in, concentrate it, and then sequester it. It's inherently very difficult, and therefore it needs a lot of energy in order to effectively sequester that carbon. And so they're doing it, and they're learning by doing. And I think we shouldn't criticize them in terms of, oh yeah, they had an ambition to remove 36,000 tons as part of Mammoth, and then they've only achieved XYZ in this short period of time. Hey, that's science. Like literally, you could point to every scientific experiment in the history of humanity, right? You have a hypothesis, and then you try to do it, and then it either proves that it's true or it's not true, and then you try to continue to innovate. They're doing it at a commercial scale. And so again, kudos to them for embracing this. It just shows the difficulty. And then final point to you, like you said, Abe, things like biochar will fill that gap on the CDR side, and we just need everything to occur in terms of decarbonization. So DAC hopefully can actually rise through this. And
yeah,
we wish all the best to the Climeworks folks.
Yeah, I agree,
please,
Renee. Like when I look at it and you look at the different pathways, my only comment on DAC is like you are exposed to energy and the opportunity cost of that energy. So like you really want to be focused on renewable energy, and that renewable energy could go to other purposes. So you've got to balance that out a bit. But like if the story is about like, are they slowing down their efforts to develop in the US, as Olivier pointed out, then I think I should add to the story. Like we have 5 or 6 projects, and we have slowed down looking at those projects. Like we certainly wouldn't want to do it reliant on subsidies. That said, like I think what the administration is doing in the US at the moment to address some of that US debt and restructure that economy is like you can appreciate what's going on there. Like Renee, you and I both lived there. Like you saw that debt clock, in New York, it just keeps ticking up. So like the fact that they're refactoring and repositioning, I have a deep appreciation for what they're trying to do in terms of like just readjusting their policy settings, both in terms of international and domestic economic policies. There are obviously impacts of that, and I think a lot of the investment that Climeworks was going to make was based on a subsidy-based scheme, which is needed for these big sort of industrial, game-changing, humanity-changing projects. So it does need government to contribute. If it's not going to be in the US, someone else is going to win. It's going to be Europe. But, I hope it's Australia. But someone else will have to help and subsidize and support, in particular DAC, to get to the scale it needs to achieve what we need to achieve net zero. So I think it's just a blip on the radar, this story.
Yeah. And DAC
actually
more money.
I remember walking past that debt clock in New York City, right? In the neatest way, like near Bryant Park.
DAC has
Yeah.
received more money than any other carbon removal technologies, and there's tens, hundreds of startups working on different types of DAC, and so Climeworks is not the only game in town either.
But they're the most
Yeah.
well known, and to something
They're the most
that
well-known.
Abe said earlier, like, you know, the Pure Earth guys, I think, also deserve a lot of credit for what they've done. Antti, Alvin, his team, and their team have done a really amazing job for putting the business case for removals on the forefront, and they've done a great great job of distributing that, right? And as they're sort of emerging as a standard, and Climeworks is the poster child, or has been the poster child for a very long time, right? And so we need to have those aspirational goals, right? And I think that that's what they embody. Will they be the largest, in terms of volumetric? No, right? But maybe in terms of highest price, I certainly think that what we've heard in the market, certainly the deals that they've structured are in the sort of the 4-figure territory, right? $1,000 or plus per ton. That shows the ambition here, right? And I think that the buyers, certainly like a Microsoft that has supported this, understand full well the difficulty of this challenge, and hence why they're willing to pay that premium. But yeah, we should just commend them. I don't think we should pile on and denigrate them. There's this kind of circular firing squad mentality in our industry where we like to take pot shots at one another. I just think we should just be collaborative. Abe, you highlighted, right? Exomad, you like shouted them out. So we're massive fans. We should be friends. Eddie, you shouted out, Carbon Future earlier, right? Dominic is an old friend of mine. We used to work at First Climate. I had him on the podcast at Carbon Exposure a couple of years back. Really, really big fan of what they're doing. Seb Manhart and for example, folks like that are huge advocates on the CDR side, who's invited to the podcast anytime, Seb. Like we should commend our peers, right? Not denigrate them.
Yeah, certainly. It seems that a lot of folks in this industry sort of shoot themselves in the foot. Like, we're all on the same team. We don't want to.
We saw this with the Red Plus issues, right? Like, there's the jurisdictional camp versus the project-based camp, and they started to denigrate one another. I saw it firsthand. I'm not going to call out any folks specifically. People that maybe know my background know exactly what I'm talking about. But effectively, like, they undermined the entire market at confidence and integrity piece by taking pot shots at each other. And at one point we had the NGO above $15 a ton, and a lot of finance going into supporting a lot of these projects. And detractors basically took advantage of that kind of squabbling and infighting, and then have eroded a lot of the confidence in the market. And now buyers are very risk averse, and they're not wanting to go and support a really essential tool that we have in this market, which is to protect the existing standing biomes that we have in the world, right? And it's just really, really sad to see. We've obviously now got to focus towards up the value chain, like you said, or up the marginal abatement cost curve to nature-based removals like ARR and blue carbon, and then go up the value chain again to more durable removals like CDR, and then you keep going further up, enhanced rock weathering, and then you keep going up to DAC, and that's where the focus is today. But like, we should just stop with the criticisms, and we should just support one another, and all solutions are viable, and it depends on what price point you can come in at. And each corporate's going to have their own sort of risk-adjusted lens in terms of where they want to work and what works for them, what are the timescales, what is their definition of quality, and it all comes down to risk.
I think if we're going to critique people, I think we should be critiquing the registries for taking too long, because I'm just going to have a crack at them. We should be critiquing,
you're like a broken record here.
Like Corsia, we should have a crack at them about why they take so long. Like CROA and SBTI, these. And then governments about how slow they've been to set policies we need to get on a net zero pathway across this planet. That's can we chuck
ideologues in there and also
go for it. And lobbyists
and
Olivier.
and lobbyists who well, I don't know, journalists are kind of, I'm not going to throw them under the bus. We've got a journalist on the call, but effectively because I feel like journalists get the bad end of the stick, that they're just oftentimes reporting the stories. But like, there's a lot of lobbyists who effectively are lobbying the fossil fuel industry, or folks that are just anti-climate, who basically take advantage of this discord within our industry. I think I like the fact that you're shouting out. You're pointing out effectively the inefficiency of folks that are holding up the progress. I'm been banging this drum around the inefficiency of the registry piece as well, like standards that are overly bureaucratic, that are built essentially, legacy standards, essentially, I point to. And we had this conversation last week with Thibault and Judith from ERS around the inefficiencies of a desktop review, human-led, people reviewing individual documents. It's not high throughput. What we need is a wholesale rethink around from ground up rebuild, right? Digital MRV from the get-go, digital PDDs from the get-go, Internet of Things approach, right? Taking data and then effectively using computational analysis like machine learning, artificial intelligence, and doing that as a factory kind of output. And then you can employ humans at the back end to do a qualitative sort of analysis like QC, right? Quality control. And then you could have a higher output. And I think then you could start to see basically greater rigor, and you could have auditability of that data stack, as opposed to this heterogeneity of, it's what I feel and I write and I use all the, it's so convoluted when you read a PDD. It's like, it takes months and months and months and months to develop, and then it takes months and months and months to review. And then there's this consultative process, and then the project gets up. No wonder it's imperfect, right? I just think we need to have a wholesale rethink. And then hopefully, if we then focus on improving those processes, we can achieve speed and scale. And I think that's where we ought to focus. Like, that's our Northern Star. And I think, that's the inefficiency around the policy, SBTI, et cetera. Yes, huge frustrations there. We've talked about it numerous times. I'd love to see greater and clearer guidance around what is a tacit endorsement for climate action, as opposed to the perverse incentive that's created through inaction. Inaction is better than action. That's the message that we're getting right now from the regulators, and it's silly. It just doesn't make sense.
If I could just add to that, like Renee, we worked at
we're hogging this. So Olivier and Eddie,
Yeah,
just
sorry.
jump in anytime.
Sorry.
This is what Abe and I used to be like in the office.
Need another episode.
Yeah,
for
jump
these
in.
topics.
Keep going, Abe. Keep going.
What I was going to say is so we worked at what is now known as Expansive before, helping to build like the infrastructure of how you trade these markets and commoditize and build derivatives and products around it. And I think what those guys have done is extraordinary, and I hope they keep on pushing. But when it comes back to it, one of the biggest challenges coming out of the integrity issues of like the last few years has been, can the buyer rely on what they've bought? And I feel like more pressure should be put on these registries to be like, and we're going to talk about, it might be a good segue for you, Ed, but like a buyer who buys a certified credit, that risk should be on the registry. And if that buyer then gets hit, it's that registry, in my opinion, that should go get insurance. They should then be taking the heat for that. And I come from a securities markets regulation background. So I worked at the Australian Stock Exchange as a lawyer. I worked in regulating listed entities and market participants. They were a private organization, no different to a NASDAQ or an NYSE, that's set up to regulate behaviors within their market. I don't understand why that same structure can't be adopted faster and with more efficiency in our carbon markets. And I think NASDAQ, and you mentioned Puro before, and we're big fans of Puro, big fans of Isometric and the others, but I think NASDAQ owning Puro is a monumental movement. It is the perfect owner for a registry. It's what they do, they run a market. I know it's a bit different, but it's a rules-based systems with guidance note and clarity. So I think over time, I'm really hoping NASDAQ with its technology background, and it's, it builds the exchanges as well. Like NASDAQ OMX is like what ASX has run on for years. So NASDAQ isn't just a marketplace, it's a technology company itself. So hopefully that technology empowers Puro, but also just its thinking around regulation and its role in the market. And then there can be more reliance on it. Because I tell you what, if you did a trade, for example, on NASDAQ, and you worked out that the Apple, you shouldn't use Apple because we're about to talk about them. But if the Microsoft share that you bought wasn't a Microsoft share, I know who you'd be calling, and it's NASDAQ. And so I've just got this thing about like, we're criticizing the participant who should be able to rely on the infrastructure and the registry that's been put in place to sell that product. And I think that's something that I think we should keep on empowering these registries to invest in and keep doing. They are a critical, important piece. And I think we often are talking about the developer and the who's trying to do the best they can do following this rules-based system, and then the buyer who's also trying to do the best they can do buying from this rules-based system. And then we're not spending enough time talking and critiquing the auditors and the registries that get paid to build that infrastructure. I think if we focus on them more, they'd probably go a bit faster. And I think that pressure has been taken off a little bit of late and should be put back on a bit more.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. There should be enough trust in the system, you know, where the burden doesn't fall on the buyer, right? For a mistake that the regulators would be making in a sense, right? But yeah, I think moving on to, and this is a perfect segue into the next story, which is about, you know, for those who don't know, you know, Apple has been facing a class action lawsuit over the carbon neutrality claims it makes for several Apple Watch models. And the lawsuit argues that Apple's offsetting strategy, specifically its use of forest-based carbon credits from projects in Kenya and China, fails to deliver real carbon reductions, right? And the plaintiffs argue that a monitoring report on the Apepu project, I believe it is called, which concluded that about 2,000 hectares of trees were planted between 2019 and 2021, is inconsistent with their, you know, high resolution Sentinel-2 satellite data, right? So, you know, these guys have got some satellite data and they're trying to get to Apple. I think it's quite a crazy story, but they're arguing that Apple should have independently audited each project it invested in, which I think is a bit ridiculous. And in a supportive move, the Environmental Defense Fund has filed a brief in Apple's defense, calling its actions reasonable and aligned with current market practices. Right? EDF counters the plaintiff's argument and says that that expectation is unreasonable, and requiring companies to double verify every credit would chill demand, undermine credibility, and slow the flow of capital into these climate projects that need it the most, right? And they acknowledge some of the flaws in the ECM, in the VCM, but argue the market is improving, like through stricter standards. And Apple has clearly demonstrated internal emissions reductions, cutting 75% of emissions per watch before offsetting the remaining 25% through verified credits, right? So punishing a company like Apple, which is a climate leader, could undermine progress and paralyze the voluntary carbon market, right? So the case is now awaiting hearing on Apple's motion to dismiss and is scheduled for August 27th in U.S. District Court in San Jose. So we'll be interested to see how that plays out. But I mean, would be keen to hear your guys' thoughts on this. I mean, how much responsibility, and this is exactly what we were talking about, how much responsibility should buyers have to verify carbon projects beyond what registries and standards already do, right?
I'll jump on this grenade, but I like what you said, Abe, before around, and it's just got me thinking about the sort of the limitation of liability that the standards. So there's a conflation. We call them it's a certification standard, and then they're registries, and oftentimes they're just linked. Sometimes there's a registry provider, but people call them registries, right? So let's just say that these standards, they don't have a very broad sort of coverage with regard to that liability, and it's a good point, and it comes to the heart of this question around what is a buyer beware, and I think that's the de facto position here. But essentially, Apple is doing its best work in job in terms of supporting climate projects that are delivering these outcomes, and they're being challenged in court. It's no different to what happened with Delta Airlines, right? And I've had a sort of front row seat in terms of that. And these class action lawsuits, whether they're frivolous or not, actually disrupt the incentive for these corporates to actually go ahead and do it. So again, commend Apple for standing and fighting this one. Commend EDF for supporting them. But it does go to that point that you made, Abe, around why doesn't it all just fall back onto the standards? And I think that the answer is twofold. First, most of the standards in the market are NGOs, right? And are not set up like a NASDAQ type of equivalent where there's a recourse and a strong financial balance sheet and, sort of rules-based approach. It's essentially NGOs structuring and focusing on the methodological sort of excellence piece and not necessarily on that legal underpinning. And that's the second bit, really, the limitation of liability. I think Vera's gotten fairly limited limitation of liability, right? Like that, and I'm just looking it up here. Not liable for any claims arising from certification or marketing labeling within the Vera registry. This includes direct economic or commercial losses, indirect, consequential, special, and punitive, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, it's a good point.
I've got so many comments on this one.
Yeah, chime in.
Olivia, did you want to say something there?
Before
No,
Abe and I
you go.
cannibalize the whole thing.
Well, I just go for it. Firstly, like kudos to Apple for buying. Like you can only judge someone on what they know at the time they make that purchase. And if we go back through time and make judgments for decisions that humans make, going back through time, we've all made some terrible, terrible decisions. Like that is we cannot run a market like that, and we cannot move forward like that. Like if you knew that the price of a stock was going to be higher tomorrow, you would buy. If you knew it was going to be lower, you wouldn't buy. But you buy based on the information you have at that time. And that is they were acting, and I don't know the nuances, and so I don't want to comment on the projects or the registry or that, but if the buyer in this case acted in good faith to follow the rules-based system that was in place and acted, then great. I also think kudos to the guys who are taking them to court. And the reason why I say that is we need more case law. We need more common law. We need more discussion and robust debate in a legal format in the judiciary about these carbon markets. Like, what are they? Who are they? What are the stakeholders? What are their roles? So I'm personally not against some good legal common law or civil law.
It does provide a precedent.
Absolutely. And it means everyone else can look on and go, okay, well, how do we amend that? Or how do we fix that? And who does have liability?
Yeah, because if Apple wins this, it'll be huge in terms of precedent.
Yeah. I think they will. But even if they lose, the thing I would do if I was Apple is I'd turn around and I'd sue whoever that provider was. And I'd be like, good luck trying to get away from that, because I've relied on you. Your job was to do this. So if they do lose, and I don't know the details, I'd be like, well, watch this waterfall action. I think that's exactly what we need, because I think it should, if someone, I don't know, like if you're a shareholder and a company was using credits and they were using credits in an inappropriate way for some reason or whatever, then the shareholder should have a go at the company. Then the company goes to insurers or goes to the person they bought it from and says, well, I bought those credits from you, so what are they? And I think they should go to the registry, and the registry should go to the auditor, and the auditor should also get pinged for that because someone signed that off, like we have this is such
chain of custody. Yeah, third-party verification. Yeah.
It's so robust. It's more robust than any market I've ever worked in. Like, where do you have where do you go to this detail in terms of project design, documentation, MRV? And this is any market, not just durable removals. This is all the way
compare
down
it to fixed income. Look at the due diligence in this process.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I mean, I do a lot in the financial service sector. We run an AFSL from ASIC here in Australia. We do more due diligence in carbon markets than we do in financial services, 100%. It doesn't even compare. It's incredible the amount of work that goes into this. So I think it's a good thing. Like let the lawsuits happen. Let's have it out. Let's work it out. Have some precedents. Understand what we can do better or improve and make those changes. But I think we should be looking through the waterfall, the chain of custody. And I think we should be looking at what all the different participants are within this market and what their role is. And I don't want to focus on Vera, because I think Vera has been a pioneer again. Like they were a not-for-profit set up to make this market happen. Like if they were to get sued, I would be the first one to put money in to say, here's a GoFundMe page to pay off anything you had to. You did the best you could do. And that's not a bad thing if they did, like, well, let's all support it and move forward. Like we should
support them.
Yeah. I think there should be more pressure put on these auditors and registries to be like, you're setting a place, like you need to make it, we need to, I don't believe in full commoditization. They're idiosyncratic, about every project for sure. And people like to sell their project by the project. But when we want to get to bank level finance, we want a commoditized product, and I think that's going to make it easy to transact. And so to some degree, you have to rely on the registry who's issuing that product. And at some point, hopefully it's not necessarily, BioCare's project in Kangaroo Island. It's just a BioCare CDR, biochar CDR product, and you can trade that. And that enables us to do all sorts of things in financing projects. So, I think it's a good thing. Let's let the market hash it out. Let's use the courts. Let's get regulators involved and see what happens. But I hope they don't lose. That would be one thing. I mean, I hope Apple. I think it's great EDF are getting involved and supporting it.
I think so too.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, I support everything you just said. Surprise, surprise. And yeah, I think that they will win. I think that it is a rational argument what you just outlined. I'm sure their lawyers will make that rational argument that they actually took action, they did it to the best of their knowledge, and I'm sure the satellite folks will, they'll bring in experts to dispute what the plaintiffs are alleging, and hopefully does then set a precedent. I think it's great that then if we do have a precedent, that then the companies that are using the excuse of not participating because they're hesitant around what could happen to them now don't have that excuse, and essentially they can define what are the rails in which they can operate. I think it's a good opportunity, though, however, for insurance companies as well to maybe provide now an insurance product to the standards themselves for this type of litigation. The insurance companies have the balance sheet, and so you could take out a policy presumably to insure against these issues, and now actually provide greater certainty and then greater confidence that then begets greater liquidity, and then we can have things like you said, a drive back towards standardization, standardized instruments of development and adoption of benchmarks, and then you can have the bankability of more of the credits. We already saw an instance of this, and then what we lacked in that whole story was insurance. And when I look at financial markets, and Abe, you mentioned this, right, in terms of your experience, the big financial markets have insurance because that's the backstop. So now an investor can then go, okay, great, let me take out insurance against these risks. And now they can protect their downside. And so obviously there's still going to be some risks that cannot be mitigated, and they'll make a decision at the investment committee whether they can go ahead. But if you can have insurance that takes away a lot of this kind of uncertainty, it would be really good. And it's a nice little opportunity for insurance companies because then their actuaries can price that. Good one.
Yeah.
Why don't we, Eddie, why don't we invite Mark Stewart and Mandy from Vera onto the podcast so they can comment
certainly anytime
on kind of their role. And I think, I want to sort of take this opportunity to shout them out because, Abe, like you said, they are pioneers. We've supported Vera. We continue to support Vera. David Antonelli is a close friend of mine. When he was the CEO, we all supported it, and this new administration, even with Judith when she was there, right? We've all supported it, and we show it on the tape. It's on the ticker, right? At my firm, a very large portion of our trading volume goes through Vera. So we believe in what they do. They do a great job. And, I've been critical around the inefficiency piece, but it's not critical at the institutional level. It's just, I want them to do better because we feel so passionate about what they do. So we should invite them on. I'd love them to comment on this issue around indemnity and liability and what could be done there to actually help to support corporates taking more action. It'd be a really great conversation with them. I'll reach out to them.
Add one thing that just on the MRV around these projects, like just because I want to comment, like Australians know this because we've had some issues with full cam and using satellite imagery to verify sequestration with related to land sector projects. And I'm involved a little bit in the geospatial industry through a company called Birdie, which I sit on the board of and was one of the co-founders. And so we've done a lot of drones, a lot of terrestrial mapping, a lot of manned aircraft, and obviously we integrate into satellite. Satellite imagery is not perfect, So if the first layer that they are trying to rely on is satellite imagery, I already am like, oh well, this will be an interesting one. So there might be a lot that comes out of about the quality of the DRV and what they're doing. But I think you need to move towards ground truthing. The problem with all of this is the increasing cost of compliance and rigor. And so you're increasing the cost of carbon. I personally think that's a good thing because carbon's too cheap right now. Like it needs to increase. And that will encourage more decarbonization, like where we started the conversation, which we need. So,
and institutional participation. The price, as the price climbs, you start to get much more participation from the broader market because the ticket sizes are interesting. So now institutionals like, oh, what's this new market? We saw it in 21, right?
Yeah.
Lots of hedge funds, lots of trading houses, lots of appetite from the large, retail and then investment banks wanting to participate. So you're absolutely right. But that cost increases as you kind of go down to that ground truthing. But there's layers. You've got the satellite at various different resolutions, right? And then you've got LiDAR that can then be applied, and then the ground truthing. Like we're working with a project developer called Verity Nature, and they've got an amazing project in Kenya and also in Uganda and in New Zealand. And they've got this great technology toolbox. But when they plant the seedlings, it's all done on the ground, and you have continuous monitoring of those seedlings for the first 2 to 3 years until they reach a certain size, and then you overlay the drone with the LiDAR information, and then you have the satellite. And then over the life of the project, then you start to have much more granularity and visibility around the performance of the sequestration, right? And you have to have that detailed approach. And so I'm sure, I don't know much about the projects that Apple purchased, kind of bringing it back to the story. But, you know, I'm sure that that these guys have, you know, passed a really rigorous DD process in order to become, you know, investable by Apple. So I wouldn't doubt that for a second in terms of that rigor, and hopefully that gets borne out in the court case, which I think is in August, right, Ed? The court
Yeah.
case?
Yeah, and also Apple says that, you know, their carbon neutrality claims weren't solely based on like the retirement of carbon credits in the first place. That's a part of it, but it's not a part of their full carbon neutrality claim. So there's another aspect. But I mean, we could dive deeper into this for the next few hours. But you know, I don't
I think you're
think we
saying
have
don't
that
invite
time,
Abe
but-
back because he and I talk too much.
Yeah, no, I'm just
You're welcome
saying.
back anytime though, Abe.
Of course. But yeah, I mean, those are the three, you know, main stories from this week. You know, Olivier, are there any other stories that I missed or that are you know, deserve some attention on this week in carbon?
No.
No, those are the biggest ones.
Being modest, there's plenty of stories. If I would encourage everyone in our industry to sign up to Quantum Commodity Intelligence. They do incredible work. Their coverage is really fantastic. So we are big fans. We're big consumers of that information. It provides a level playing field in terms of information. If you don't, you're at the bottom end of that asymmetry. So really highly commend them. And also, so thank you, Olivier, for joining us. And Abe, again, thank you for joining. I always love when you and I are on a chat, whether personal or on a webinar, or in this case, podcast. So appreciate that. And yeah, stay tuned for what we've got in store. Abe and Supply Care and Valterra are working on some stuff. We're trying to help them to commercialize their pipeline. So if you've got any interest on biochar CDR credits, as Abe pointed out, the market is short in terms of supply. Give us a call. Shameless plug there.
Shameless plug. Shameless plug. All right. Yeah, I mean, definitely. Thanks for joining, guys. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks for having us, guys. Appreciate it.
Yeah. For our audience, you know, be sure to follow the show and share it with someone who's deep in the space or just carbon curious. So until then, we'll catch you next week.